Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked, going through the week's sports news with me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times and Tariq Panja from the New York Times. Now, Tariq, we unexpectedly found ourselves in the same place this week with someone.
Yep, interesting hour with Jim of Manchester.
Sir Jim Ratcliffe, we're with him on his first full day as co-owner of Manchester United, and we'll get into more of what he had to say later on. We'll also get more in depth on some Russian issues. Now we've passed 2 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, leading to Russia's isolation internationally. And something that caught my eye, that's Andreas, the former Arsenal player, this week in talks with Vladimir Putin, saying that Russia should have their own alternative to the FIFA video game.
That means potentially 3 kind of FIFA video football games. So we've got EA Sports FC, the original. Then we've got FIFA's proposed, it's going to be the best ever. And now we're going to have the sort of Russian rival as well. I mean,
maybe just 2, because there isn't a FIFA video game just yet. Gianni has been close to Vladimir Putin, we've seen in the past. Perhaps those 2 could double up, and that will be the new FIFA video game.
Perhaps it could be EPOA Sports FC.
You've got the brand there already. Well, what else has happened this week? The new MLS season beginning in the United States. Of course, this is a competition shown globally on Apple TV. And it seems Apple have an interest in who's going to be part of the show, like dramas or films, because their senior vice president, Eddie Q, has been quoted on AFP by journalist Simon Evans saying, "When anybody asks, what do I want from anybody, any of the teams, I'm like, sign some more players." So is that for Apple to be asking for?
Well, sign some more star players, I presume he means, because Apple TV is very much invested in like Lionel Messi at Inter Miami, and it's the thing that he hopes is going to drive the interest in Apple TV's coverage of the tournament globally. So I'm sure he definitely wants more star players. Of course he does. You know, that's obvious, but it's not the easiest sell, perhaps.
Yeah, what we're seeing from Messi in the league, I guess, are these viral clips. We had the first game, and I couldn't tell you who won the game, but I do know that Lionel Messi was being Lionel Messi, and at one moment chipped the ball over a prone player, and that got some sort of like 100,000 retweets and so on. Do you think these leagues, the MLS with Messi, and we talked about the Saudi League in the past, do you think these are the leagues that are going to be kind of just known for viral clips rather than anyone outside of those who really care about who wins or loses those championships?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? About, are these competitions with a lot of sort of famous names, people perhaps don't want to watch the whole match.
MLS would have to change things like the salary cap and squad rules if they want to get more star names, and that perhaps would grow the audiences even more.
I mean, it is an interesting thing, this thing about star players going to like the Saudi Pro League or the Major League Soccer in America. Is, you know, are people actually going to be bothered watching the whole games? Probably not. But you know, people who follow these players as individuals, they are going to be more interested in watching clips. Now, you know, I suppose there's a question about the sort of commercial viability of that. And is that enough? Probably not.
Well, some of the most viral moments in world football over the last few weeks have actually come from the Bundesliga, with fans sending things like vehicles onto the pitch to protest against the attempt to sell part of a stake in the commercial rights to private equity firms. But the protests have won, and we'll discuss later on about the power of protests and what it means for the Bundesliga. But we start with that big news about Manchester United. We spent so long talking about it, the sale process, the questions about Sheikh Jassim, the Qatari, even raised by Sir Jim Ratcliffe with us this week about his very existence in these talks. But we got to hear from Sir Jim Ratcliffe at the Ineos offices for an hour, finally after completing his purchase of 27.7% of United, with control of the club. And we're just now trying to discover how it will all work. It all sounds so optimistic, obviously, on day one.
Yeah, it must have been fascinating, guys. So, like, set the scene for me and other listeners about, you know, what this was like, you know, how it was organised, where you met him.
Yeah. So where would you expect Britain's richest man to have his office? In Knightsbridge. There's about, I don't know, a dozen of us. We were all sat around a table, behind which there was a mannequin in the famous number 7 shirt of Manchester United, Best, Beckham, Cantona, players that had made that shirt famous. And Rob, a few programmes lying about as well from some of the greatest days.
Yeah, from the European Cup final victories, all laid out on the table. I mean, was it you who pointed out the mannequin? Someone did, and Sir Jim almost seemed shocked it was referenced that it was even behind it, didn't he?
Yeah, he would be shocked as well because I think about 10 or 15 minutes after we'd finished, someone came and took the mannequin away and took it up in a lift where it probably normally belongs. So there was, I guess, a scene setting from the people who arranged the room, and that is that element of giving Jim Ratcliffe his Manchester United bona fide. He's not only a billionaire, not only a man from Manchester, but someone who has been a Manchester United fan from childhood. And I think that was something that they were trying to portray. And yeah, that's what we got.
But there's no denying he is a local lad. He clearly seems to support United as a kid. He's not some outside investor who's trying to sort of feign interest in the club or Manchester United players over the years. And he did say he's not some, I think he's some sort of,
anorak.
Stats and everything. The anorak, is he?
No. That said, see, I agree with you. I think he's a fan. But sometimes we want to make these things a lot more romantic than they need to be. Manchester United has millions of supporters, some of them living in Manchester, some of them living in Monaco, some of them living all over the world. I just think he's a regular Manchester United fan. And one of the things that struck me is his references were more recent than his 71 years might suggest. I've seen interviews in the past and currently talks about Eric Cantona quite a bit. That was the shirt that was behind him, the 99 Champions League final, but not really things from his childhood, probably the days the Busby Babes and the European Cup, etc. He doesn't really talk about that stuff, I don't think.
Yeah, he obviously says he supported the club since about the age of 7. So that would be, right early Busby, the recovery post Munich, right the way through, obviously, to 68 and winning the European Cup. Martyn, so you weren't in the room, but what was the big question you'd have wanted asked to him? And let's see if we can give an insight into how it was answered.
Well, I mean, I suppose that most Man United fans particularly would be wanting to know what his plans were for building the team, bringing in new players, new staff, new backroom staff. But I've always been quite fascinated by this idea of the sort of redevelopment of Old Trafford, and this because he has mentioned it, or if not directly, people working for him have mentioned this thing about whether public money should be used to build a sort of new national stadium for the north of England, which raises a whole kind of series of issues about kind of state support of football clubs. And for example, Everton haven't got any public money for theirs, but I think he even referenced perhaps that Manchester City, West Ham United, both have sort of public money was used to build the stadiums that they now play in.
And, whose points about all this investment, and I was raising the issue to him of the use of public money, and he then referenced how often it's London who gets these big projects, like for the Olympics around Stratford in 2012. He even referenced the new fast railway that was planned to link London to the north. It's called HS2. Instead, the government have seen cost spiral, so they're going to stop it at Birmingham. So this huge railway plan that was going to help to speed up the time to get from Manchester to London has actually been slashed. And in the UK, it's known as the levelling up agenda, something from the Boris Johnson era he brought in when he won the election. And he's saying it needs a bit of levelling up to get investment in the north. I suppose a lot of countries have divides between different regions of where the funding goes. But, certainly questions raised about should a wealthy football club be getting public money?
Yeah, I was struck by the fact that he's the messenger. I mean, this is Britain's richest man. We're talking several billion pounds in his bank accounts with the Glazers, another group of billionaires. There is an issue about investment in outside of London and the regions, but maybe sitting opposite Harrods and listening to a man who lives in public investment might not be the right messenger.
And he was asked about living in Monaco and his tax status.
He said he'd paid tax in the UK for 65 years and he's wanting to enjoy a bit of sun, and that's why he's living in Monte Carlo. You know, and you've seen online the reaction to that, Martyn. What do you think?
So was he paying tax as a 6-year-old? That's very entrepreneurial.
Well, that's how you build up your billions, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can see with this project, if it was United funding the stadium and then perhaps public money funding a wider footprint, community facilities, there'd be a certain logic there. There's a lot of land around Old Trafford. You know, those familiar with particularly the London stadiums or Anfield, there isn't much space to build, but Old Trafford got car parks. There's a lot of industrial parts before you get to the River Irwell.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, no one would say that public money shouldn't be spent as part of regeneration projects around and about that area. But the idea that you would spend public money on helping to rebuild a stadium itself, I spoke to two former sports ministers, Richard Cable and Tracy Crouch. They on both sides of the political divide. They were both said absolutely no way.
Tracy Crouch, a Tottenham fan, of course. Tottenham built a new stadium, through their own funds. In fact, they had some criticisms when they tried to use the furlough money in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, and that had to be reversed. Something that was interesting, I asked Sir Jim, would you build a stadium for the women's team? Something that you've got Brighton who are looking at doing and others. And he replied, the current Old Trafford could be used for the women's team, perhaps scaled down if they were to build a new stadium on the site for obviously the men's team.
Just on the stadium question, there's two options to be clear, and neither of them are cheap. He said a refurb of Old Trafford would cost £1 billion and would take a bit longer than a new stadium. And also in terms of that public money, Martyn, he suggested they would still put in £1 billion of their own money into such a project because it will be wrong. Completely wrong if they don't put that type of investment in.
So Jim Ratcliffe bemoaning the fact also that all the national stadiums are in the south, particularly Wembley. But we had some intriguing news this week about the future of Wembley. Well, at least one plan.
Yeah, so this is a sort of intriguing thing which came out from an elite report about the Rugby Football Union, which home of Twickenham Stadium, that they basically passed an idea last year that as an option to sell Twickenham Stadium and buy 50% of Wembley and basically combine rugby union and football there. They've actually dropped that idea and instead they're going to spend £665 million basically just renovating the stadium, not increasing the capacity, not basically changing anything. But apart from making the seats a bit wider so you don't bump your knees on the seat in front.
It does seem a slightly dated stadium at Twickenham, lacking the glamour of those new modern football stadiums. But it seems rugby and football combined at Wembley could work. You might need a few shifts around in the fixtures, but a lot of the main men's rugby internationals are in February, March, and then again in November.
Yeah, it could definitely work. It works in Stade de France. They have it there, but it's this whole sort of historic thing. Wembley, the historic home of football, Twickenham, the historic home of rugby, both go back 100 years. Do you just give that up? And I think there'd be too many people clamouring at the gates if they tried to do it.
But just to move on, Rob, he seemed to mention another club quite a lot throughout that hour, didn't he?
Manchester City mentioned really as setting the benchmark for success. They're the team that he knows that you need to knock off their perch. It was a phrase that he had clearly lined up to emulate Sir Alex Ferguson arriving at the club in '86 and the ambition to usurp Liverpool. But he sort of sees them as one of the best in the world and emulating having a particular playing style throughout the teams is something that he wants as well.
Well, of course. They've won the title. What is it? 5 out of the last 6 years. So, of course, they are the team to beat. And being just down the road from Old Trafford, it's particularly galling, no doubt, for Manchester United supporters. So I'm not surprised he sort of referenced them.
Yeah. Of course, he's already hired Omar Barada I think it was a chief operating officer last at Manchester City to be the chief executive. He said it took a bit of wrangling, but they were grown up about it in the end, and they got Omar Barada. There's someone who knows the Manchester City setup. He did say another team hasn't been as grown up about another recruitment hire they want. Rob,
yeah, Newcastle United frustrated that they're not going to be releasing Dan Ashworth to join as a sporting director, maybe instantly. Talk of compensation that could be £15 million, and a sense he could be put on gardening leave, and that's something that irritates Sir Jim because he wants to bring him in to lead the overhaul.
He did, and he said the idea of having someone being put out of work for almost 2 years is ridiculous. There should be a period of a gap. It's not called gardening leave all over the world, so we call it gardening leave here. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, but 18 months seems quite long, and it was really frustrating for Ratcliffe, wasn't it?
Yeah, but mind you, Newcastle had to pay compensation to Brighton and Hove Albion when they got Ashworth, so you can understand why they want the same sort of thing, and they've got him on a much longer release date. So no wonder they want a significant compensation.
Yeah, that's the football ecosystem. Like sometimes clubs complain about perhaps not being able to sign a player when they themselves are stopping another club, taking one of theirs as well, and other clubs sometimes on the constant complaining about the power of the Premier League and its wealth, but then being quite happy to bank a huge fee from a transfer when they sell to the Premier League.
One other thing about Ratcliffe and football, which came to the fore sort of in the last couple of years, was this suggestion that he'd put in a bid to try and buy Chelsea at the last minute. Was he asked about that? What did he say?
He was asked about it, and he basically said, Ineos, his company, they want to buy the best sports teams. They have the best cycling team and America's Cup sailing team, but football is the world's biggest sport. The Premier League is the world's biggest league, and teams, the opportunity to buy the best teams don't come up. He had no idea United would come up, and Chelsea were there on the market, and they did make an offer at the end, and it didn't happen. And now he's got this opportunity.
And I did ask him about how Chelsea have been since then, about whether they've shown the way perhaps not to run a football club with the Todd Bowley Clear Lake spending on transfers that haven't worked out, struggling in the Premier League. And he didn't get into criticising them. Then he talked more broadly about getting recruitment right. And as we did develop the conversation and talk further, obviously, the Glazers themselves, he was very careful not to criticise them, wasn't he?
He was really careful not to criticise them. He said the sales process was rocky. He blamed hedge funds. He mentioned Qataris, the American SEC, but he said the Glazers had always been kind of positive throughout that, and that helped them forge this relationship. But he wasn't able to answer the question as to how it will actually work. 27% owner, they're still the majority owners. We didn't get that clarity, I didn't think.
No, because they've got control of football operations, but ultimately the Glazers control the purse strings. And when asked about how that will work, he said, I don't think we're going to be taking the legal agreements out of the bottom drawer as long as we're doing the right things. And I'm certain that relationship is going to go very well. But what about Liverpool? I always think back to the Hicks and Gillette relationship. It seemed great at the beginning. They had a 50-50 ownership, perhaps even more problematic. And then when they couldn't agree on the refinancing, it led to a huge legal issue before they sold to Fenway Sports Group. So, Martyn, they're sounding optimistic now, but it's not always harmonious.
No, I think it's going to be the biggest challenge, actually, around this whole process. 27%. He's got football controlled, got people on the board that he's worked with us for a long time. But I think, you only know how it's going to actually operate when the stress is hit and when you have difficult times. So it'd be very interesting to monitor this one.
And those difficult decisions like change of managers. And I asked him if they'd be brutal when it came to changing managers. And Sir Jim said, we're not a brutal organisation, really. Sometimes you do have to make decisions that aren't that popular.
Well, he wouldn't go as far as he has in his other businesses. He has been brutal. You can ask some of the workers laid off over the years in the petrochemical industry about management style, and a man like that would have had to make tough decisions. Rob, we also asked, I believe, about why no one else was really bidding for Manchester United. He said it's such a prized asset, and he said he was surprised by that as well. It was him and this Qatari group led by, the lesser seen Sheikh Jassim. Whereas Chelsea, there was so many bidders, if you remember that process. He said he couldn't understand that either.
Yeah, and he said at one point, actually last May, when they're at the Monaco Grand Prix, they were already getting the champagne ready to celebrate having done the deal. That was a time, I think, when it seemed that they were looking to get almost 70% of the club before they restructured the deal to around a quarter and rising of United from the Glazers. And, the whole process seemed to raise so many questions. He said even Sheikh Jassim, which I heard during the process, never seemed to even meet the Glazers. And there were so many questions about the Qatari who they had these delegation trips to Old Trafford where Sir Jim himself very visibly arrived at Old Trafford to go in with his team, and Sheikh Jassim sent a delegation of sort of largely unknowns, and he was never seen or heard from as part of this process.
The Manchester United PLC put out, didn't they, on the formal documents basically saying that the Qataris never provided proof of funds that was necessary. Also, something which came up this week, which I think you saw, Tariq, which amused me. Finnish businessman Thomas Ziliakus, who made a big sort of splash claiming he wanted to buy Manchester United in the summer, but that never progressed. And I think quite a few of us at the time were sort of a bit dubious, but things have actually moved on this week.
They have moved on. He's not buying the Reds, but he has got an Interpol red notice against him by the looks of it. The Singaporean authorities are looking to catch up with the Finnish entrepreneur related to his financial dealings. So a man in the news again. It wasn't just his one day of fame when he announced his bid for Manchester United, it seems.
Which raises all sorts of questions. Just because someone announces they're bidding for something like Manchester United, such a high-profile process, what sort of caution do you adopt to that reporting, particularly if there are certain questions that you might have about his wealth and status and actual ability to complete a transaction that he's pushing himself for?
Well, this is the point, isn't it? It's about Manchester United and engagement, and if anyone says they're going to bid for something, it wasn't only Man United. Do you remember there was in the Chelsea process, there was a fellow who appeared on Instagram, a Turkish man, who said the flag of Turkey will be flying over Stamford Bridge within 24 hours, and he was poised to buy it. That guy disappeared. And then there was the case of, I suppose he was in the process, but he kept being referred to as the Nigerian billionaire Dozie Mbozo, I think, who was about to buy Sheffield United. And you talk to people in Nigeria, either they hadn't heard of him or they were convinced he's not a billionaire. Now he's up on SEC charges, I believe, in the United States. So, yeah, Rob, I think a bit of caution is always, valid at times like this.
Right.
Yeah, I think us in the media, we need to be sort of fairly sort of cautious before we sort of give plenty of airtime to these people because, and there have been people who've thrown their hats in the ring for Everton, turned out to be sort of basically fraudulent. And I think this stands as a warning. One thing about Thomas Ziliakus, which I think was perhaps the sort of the biggest businessman in the world, was that did he not? I think when he sent out this email, he included his mobile phone number.
He did, and I think he said it was like a whip round as well. I think he said, "If he just joined me," so it was a bloke who sent an email to everyone. Again, a fan maybe, and he said, "If you're a fan as well, why don't you chip in and we'll all buy Man United together?" Who knows? It might have worked in these days of virality.
Yeah, we want access, but then when often someone's too accessible, you wonder why they are if they're claiming to have the sort of standing that they do have.
It's that balance.
Just to round off on Jim Ratcliffe, 71 now. He seemed like a man in a hurry. The takeaway line, one of them, is like he said he wants Manchester United back at the top of English and European football in about 3 years, which would be the 150th anniversary of the club in 2028. So man in a hurry, basically.
And he said that we are in the entertainment business. That's why you don't want to watch bland football or characterless football, and talking about bringing in this playing style. And he was asked about the Ineos way of doing things, and he said, in Ineos, we don't mind people making mistakes. We're much less sympathetic when they make the same mistake twice. And he said they've made mistakes, before at Lausanne and Nice, and that is one of the ongoing issues, multi-club ownership. He's certainly hoping that UEFA smooth the path for them to have potentially United and Nice in the same European competitions.
Yeah, that's an organisation that has been known to smooth the path for the biggest team. So I can quite easily see some sort of situation created where these owners of these big multi-club projects will essentially be given a way out of the situation. There's so many now as well. It's been allowed to grow, I think. And he said there is no scenario in the world where Manchester United, if they qualify for the Champions League, won't be playing. And you kind of get a sense he's right.
And of course, United is still such a huge moneymaker, helped by all the broadcast rights, which takes us neatly onto matters in Germany, where it's on the continent so much about how can you close the gap on the Premier League when you need to bring in extra revenue. And the plan from the German leagues was to bring in some private equity and to sell a 20-year slice of their broadcast sponsorship revenue and get an upfront payment. They were in talks with various bodies. By this week, only CBC Capital Partners were in the running, but that deal was abandoned. It follows fans throwing tennis balls onto pitches, leading to long delays, even remote-controlled cars and small planes sending smoke onto pitches, a bicycle lock, someone attached themselves to the goalpost. We get to the protest in a second, but the business part of it all, the fact they've had to abandon it, a complete U-turn.
The second time as well. This happened last year as well. They were about to forge ahead with a deal with private equity in the manner that La Liga has already done in Spain and Ligue 1 in France. And for the second time, they had to abandon it. This would have been €1 billion or so in return for 8% of the TV rights to CVC, the last player in this game, because Blackstone, another company, a week or so earlier, already pulled out because of the fan protests. Really interesting story.
Yeah, I don't think it would happen in any other country apart from Germany. Obviously, most people probably know they have a sort of ownership model where fans have to own just over 50% of the club. So I think it probably wouldn't happen in the UK and anywhere else. It is an interesting one, and I can see why fans think that it's that they don't want to sell their control or whatever to a private capital firm.
Fans in the past protested about having Monday night games, and it forced the league to abandon that scheduling. So what does this tell us about the power of fan protest? Because it suggests that if fans protest, the league will eventually cave in. So it does have the potential to lead to more disruption of matches if they want to use their presence and get a decision reversed.
Yeah, it does potentially, but I agree with Martyn. There's a very particular set of circumstances in Germany. Fans have been very vocal about footballing matters and also social issues in Germany in a way that we don't see elsewhere. Martyn mentioned the 50+ one. And then there's this thing about the commercialization of football, which has been rampant in Europe over the last 2 or 3 decades. And in Germany, it's just not being swallowed in the same way as it is elsewhere. And we've seen a sign of that again.
It's the power of principle protest. German fans are very principled. I think there's a lot of self-interest, perhaps from fans in some other countries. We've seen splits across the Premier League, whether it's about related party transactions with transfer deals between the clubs in the same group and the like. But in Germany, the fans really seem to be about the collective, and they are protesting on these strong principles.
It's quite refreshing, actually, because it just seems to be such a sort of the steady drip turned to a sort of almost flood of not just private equity but state-related organisations buying football clubs and buying sport, and Saudi Arabia is this sort of taking over everything. It does seem like perhaps it's quite refreshing when people stand up against that sort of thing.
It is also the highest match-going attendance, average attendance in Europe, probably the world, if you count the top 2 divisions in Germany. I say the top 2 divisions. I think one of these weekends, maybe last weekend, the second division had a higher average gates than the top division in Germany, and that's it's a sign of a really healthy kind of domestic league. It's certainly when it comes to people attending football, which is, part of the whole experience, not just sitting and watching it on TV.
Of course, there always is the safety matter, and whether you're a player or the authorities sort of overseeing these games, there is the potential that these objects landing on the pitch, if they're arriving on vehicles, could be something far more grave, something far more serious, particularly in the heightened sort of security environment. So that will be why, if you're a player suddenly seeing this, that there will be alarm.
They'll be alarmed, yeah. But I mean, we saw with the British fans or English fans with the European Super League proposals, you can get results by coming together collectively and saying what you want for your game.
One of the things we've seen football come together in some parts of the world in the last 2 years is protesting about Russia, or more in solidarity with Ukraine. We are now 2 years on from the full-scale invasion, the attempt by Russia of Ukraine. And of course, it led to Russia's football teams being banned by both FIFA and UEFA from their official competitions, including qualifying. Of course, UEFA tried to partially lift that ban last year by allowing under-17 teams back, and UEFA President Alexander Shefrin talked about that recently at the Congress in Paris about, I think, not wanting to punish kids. But something that's come into sharp focus is the fact that, of course, Russia aren't completely in the cold in international football. They have been playing some friendlies, and the latest is going to be in Paraguay for the men's team.
That's a strange one, isn't it? But I suppose, if you look from a sort of non-European focus, actually, the anti-Russian sentiment is by no means global, is it? I mean, lots of countries in Africa, I know, are sort of fairly ambivalent, if not sort of supportive of Putin, and I guess that's the same in South America.
This game will be in Moscow in March, and it will be the first national team game for the Russian men against South American opposition since the invasion. And of course, Paraguay is the home of CONMEBOL, the South American Confederation.
Yeah, so CONMEBOL, as you say, is based in Luque, close to Asunción, the Paraguayan capital. The president, Dominguez, is former Paraguay FA president, and also a FIFA vice president. And funny enough, FIFA is one of those organizations that has suspended Russia from international football. It just shows, as Martyn said, this isn't a universal condemnation of Russia. Some people are either ambivalent about this war, or perhaps even more supportive of Russia than we can kind of see in Europe or expect to see.
Yeah, interestingly, we often think this just exists in football circles. It's a football discussion, but I'm led to believe that this particular game was talked about in the British Foreign Office ahead of the Foreign Secretary David Cameron, former Prime Minister, going to South America this week and going to Paraguay. It was something that was on their radar about perhaps where support for the war is, although then Paraguay's foreign minister did make a reference to admiring the British stance taking on Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. So perhaps the difference there between the government and the football team.
Yeah, it's Cameron maybe about to help get a trade deal with CONMEBOL, Rob? Britain now in the world post-Brexit.
Maybe there's World Cup bids to think about. Certainly you think a women's one before the men's one next for England, or the way things are now, a UK-wide bid.
Yeah, for sure. At least a memorandum of understanding, if not, if nothing else.
Been hearing quite a bit from Vladimir Putin this week, though, in sport, because he's at a sports event. One sports event where he's actually very welcome, because they've launched their own event, a tournament called the Games of the Future. And Vladimir Putin was the opening ceremony held in Kazan. And according to the Russian state agency TASS, competitors will make use of the latest achievements in cyber sports, robotics, augmented and virtual reality, information technology and artificial intelligence. And also, just this week, the Russians and North Koreans forming a new partnership, particularly around sport. This sort of tells us about some of the alliances at the moment.
Right. Is there any team called Fancy Bear at all? Is there a computer hacking contest or anything like that? Do we know any more details of what these events will look like?
Well, didn't it talk about something called about getting sort of phygital, which is a combination of physical and digital? sounds like the ultimate sort of, you forget about all the, Russian doping scandal. This, you can all do it with artificial intelligence and sort of robotics and being bionics, perhaps.
Not the only country that's looking to do something like that. Saudi Arabia is looking to invest billions into esports. So that idea of computer games and digital sports seems to be the way some of these countries want to go.
Yeah, Saudi certainly strengthen themselves in world sport. And we've talked so often on the pod about the footballers that they're signing, all the athletes they're attracting with huge fees into Saudi Arabia, but also football administrators as well, are signing to Saudi this week from English football.
Yeah, Polly Hanford, the Director of Legal and Governance at the English FA. I think what's sort of particularly noteworthy about this is, especially given what, the Jordan Henderson experience. So Polly Hanford, she a couple of years ago, she wrote a sort of very strongly worded article on the FA's website, saying how advocating the Rainbow Laces campaign, brilliant way of combining support and awareness of LGBTQ plus inclusion, and saying football presents a unique platform to ensure we truly have inclusion for all. So going from that to a country where homosexuality is illegal, not surprisingly, sort of people raising a few eyebrows.
No, we'll probably get this idea that the country is changing. Javier Tebas, for example, the La Liga president, he was scathing about Saudi Arabia not so long ago, and now he's signed a massive sponsorship deal and said, it's one of the best places in the world. So perhaps these opinions are being changed one lawyer at a time.
Absolutely. Well, that's some of the main talking points around the sports news issue. Some quite somber stories there to reflect since we last recorded Sport Unlocked. One just actually is given a chance to reflect on some incredible athletic feats. Kelvin Kiptum, the world marathon record holder, dying in the car crash in Kenya near the Rift Valley. I mean, such an incredible person, only ever ran 3 marathons and set the world record in his third and final one.
It does seem like a terrible waste of a life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it struck me how we perhaps didn't necessarily celebrate in his lifetime in that sort of, barely a year span where he made such an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge star as well in his sport. But, I mean, it's you say celebrate. I mean, it's very difficult, though, in terms of hard to celebrate. Think of any marathon runners that would be global stars, given the way sports is, where football, I guess, sucks up all the oxygen. When you think about where the attention is, track and field, and certainly marathon and long distance running isn't one of those sports that get all the eyeballs and all the attention, is it?
Yeah.
I think the other thing around Kiptum is that he never got the chance to win that Olympic gold medal, which I think is a sort of, certainly in athletics, it's that sort of takes you up to another level, doesn't it?
It does, and he was saying that he wanted to break the 2-hour mark as well, which would have been absolutely immense if someone was able to do that.
And talking about the Olympics, qualifying is ongoing for the women's competition, and devastating news there as well. Zambia in the midst of their qualifying campaign, preparing to face Ghana. One of their players died from an illness, Norin, Betani, at just the age of 24.
Yeah, I mean, this Zambia's women's team, I think they're going to go ahead and try and play this qualifier in her memory, aren't they? But they must be, I'm sure, devastated by this.
And it is quite a sombre end to the pod, but from Germany, Andreas Brehme, who scored the winning goal in the 1990 World Cup final, dying at the age of 63.
I remember that final as a schoolboy. And the thing with Andy Brehme, he was one of those footballers who was just as adept with his left foot as he was with his right foot, which even now, all these years on, is still quite rare. What a great player, and we do have those really fond memories of him.
Yeah, I was a bit older than you, I think. Well, at the time, I was then, and I still am now. But
It still has it, unfortunately.
I watched that match against England in Darlington in the northeast of England. I was at journalism college there. Yeah, sat round a small TV. Another disappointing night for English football. As Gary Lineker said, football's an easy game, 11 aside, play for 90 minutes, and the Germans win on penalties.
Absolutely. And that about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. As ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook and Instagram. Always welcome to hear your thoughts. If you hit subscribe, you land in your feeds automatically. Thank you both.
Cheers, Rob.
Cheers, Rob.
And thank you everyone for listening. For now, goodbye.